Honestly, I have discovered that I succeed most when I simply stay true to who I am. I may have attended formal drama school, but I have to admit, everything I attempt seems to end up having a humorous twist to it. The narrative, lurking behind the heartbreaking demise of a cherished television icon, was far more intricate and shadowy than the public ever understood. For decades, the unexplained drowning of Carolwayne has ignited a firestorm of gossip, lingering doubts and relentless theorising. However, freshly analysed evidence hints that her passing was not merely a tragic mishap, but rather a convoluted maze of hidden agendas and unexpected events. This story represents more than just a case of Tinseltown glitz turning grim. It serves as a haunting warning of how the bright lights of stardom can obscure terrifying truths. What actual events transpired to bring about Carolwayne's final terrifying moments? The truth hidden beneath the surface might completely shatter your perception of the case. The baffling fatality involving Carolwayne on January 13, 1985, left her fan base and industry peers in a state of absolute shock. The performer, who had achieved stardom through her hilarious sketches on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, was discovered lifeless in the waters off the coast of Manzanillo, Mexico. On the surface, the devastating news appeared to be a straightforward tragedy, yet the specific details of the incident immediately triggered alarm bells. The bizarre location, the specific timing, and the strange elements enveloping her vanishing created a confusing mosaic that encouraged suspicion rather than providing any sense of finality. Reports indicated that Wayne was enjoying a getaway with her partner, identified as comedian Peter Marshall, along with a group of acquaintances on that doomed evening. From the very beginning, witness testimonies regarding that night clashed with one another, making the task of reconstructing the truth nearly impossible. Search and rescue crews eventually spotted her remains drifting a significant distance away from the vessel they had chartered. Most chillingly, she was discovered floating face down while clad in a nightgown rather than swimwear, a detail that struck investigators and those following the case as deeply peculiar. From the instant the headlines hit the papers, murmurs of foul play and sinister components began to swirl through the rumour mill. While some observers theorised she might have simply slipped from the deck by mistake, others suspected there were malevolent forces at play behind the scenes. The boat's skipper recounted seeing erratic behaviour and strange occurrences that night, yet no single coherent narrative could be established. The clashing stories from the survivors only thickened the mystery. Law enforcement officials in Mexico quickly closed the file, ruling her death an accidental drowning resulting from a fall overboard. Nevertheless, various American authorities and Hollywood insiders voiced strong skepticism regarding that conclusion, pointing to the investigation's lack of depth and the glaring unanswered question of why she was alone in the ocean. The shadowy nature of her final minutes strongly implied that this was something far more complex than a mere slip and fall. The official explanation offered strictly zero comfort to her grieving family members and her inner circle of friends. A significant number of people believed that a portion of the reality was being deliberately suppressed, largely due to the remote location and the influence of those surrounding her. Over the years, the story of that night has shifted, repeatedly plagued by missing pieces and accounts that directly contradict one another. Uncovering the bedrock truth of what transpired during those final hours has proven to be an exceptionally difficult challenge. Although emergency responders and local fishermen were the primary people to retrieve her body, their subsequent reports on her condition sparked even more debate. When interviewed later, some individuals who had been aboard the boat depicted a chaotic and frantic scene right before she went missing. Yet, despite these concerning testimonies, official interrogations were surprisingly brief, and key witnesses were rarely pressed for comprehensive explanations. The haunting nature of Carol's death cemented it as an enduring Hollywood enigma, as it perfectly fused elements of heartbreak, strange circumstances, and high-stakes secrecy. While devastated fans were left bewildered, the sheer number of oddities drove many to look past the superficial story and question the official narrative. It quickly became apparent that if the key to unlocking this tragedy existed, it was buried deep beneath layers of half-truths and silent agreements. The confusion clouding her death cannot be separated from the complex reality of who Carolwayne was and the industry she navigated. A deeper look at Carolwayne's life and professional journey. Wayne kicked off her career in the 1960s, carving out a unique space for herself as a comedic force with an undeniable sparkle and magnetic screen presence. She rocketed to national fame as the recurring matinee lady on Johnny Carson's Tonight Show, a gig that made her a familiar face in living rooms across the United States. Her public persona masterfully blended stunning beauty, sharp wit, and a playful edge, winning over both audiences and her professional peers. Although the public often viewed her as the glamorous comic foil on television, Carol was a dedicated artist with aspirations that reached far beyond supporting parts. She secured roles in a wide array of films and television series, consistently proving she possessed a versatility that extended well past the laughter. When the cameras stopped rolling, she manoeuvred through the entertainment world with a fragile mix of toughness and sensitivity, juggling the demands of stardom with private battles. Her personal history was also defined by a tangle of complicated connections, spanning intense romances and deep friendships within the cutthroat entertainment business. Specifically, Carol's bond with Peter Marshall, the game show host she was accompanying at the time of the incident, remained a focal point for those trying to understand the dynamics at play. Once the news of her passing hit the wire, the floodgates opened and everyone began dissecting every inch of their relationship, scrutinising the personal dynamics just as heavily as the professional ones. Carol, always the one standing in the centre of the spotlight, found herself navigating the same treacherous waters that nearly every woman in Hollywood had to tread back in those days. It was a vicious cycle, the crushing pressure to maintain that eternal youth, the desperate clawing for roles that actually mattered, and the media glare that refused to blink. All of it combined to make her daily existence incredibly heavy. Yet through all the madness of Tinseltown, she never lost her footing. To those in her inner circle, she remained the approachable, down-to-earth woman they adored. Behind closed doors, away from the glitz, people consistently described her as a genuinely sweet soul who possessed a wicked sense of humour. While she tried to steer her own ship, her journey was tragically defined by an industry that seemed determined to cap her potential, trapping her in a box she could never quite break out of. Colleagues often whispered that she possessed depths of talent that the world would never get to see, a powerhouse performer stuck playing the fool. That was simply the reality of the game back then. The industry placed suffocation limits on just how far female comedians and actresses were allowed to go. Naturally, this glass ceiling fueled a deep-seated frustration, something she would occasionally vent about in hushed tones to her closest confidants. When the red light went off, a different Carol emerged, one who was intellectual, deeply thoughtful, and a far cry from the dizzy blonde persona she was famous for. Those who really knew her spoke of a woman with a sharp mind, but also one who carried a lingering, quiet sadness in her eyes. It painted a picture of a complex, multi-layered human being, largely unrecognisable from the one-dimensional character she portrayed on screen. That dichotomy made her endlessly fascinating, but perhaps also left her vulnerable, a fragile state that so many creative souls seem to struggle with. Spending nearly a decade as a fixture on The Tonight Show certainly cemented her status as a bona fide television legend. However, it was a double-edged sword. To the masses, Carol Wayne was only that one specific character and nothing more. Breaking free from that mould proved nearly impossible, as the weight of that long-standing association crushed her attempts to show her true range. She found herself in a career stalemate, yet she remained beloved, garnering genuine affection from audiences and peers alike who recognised her magnetic charm and undeniable skill. Examining the trajectory of her life gives us a window into just how heavy the burdens were that she carried through the Hollywood machine. It also sets the stage for that final bewildering night, providing crucial context to a tragedy that still confuses people to this day. Her story was one of brilliance and vibrancy, far richer than her premature and sorrowful exit would suggest. As for that fateful evening, the reports are a mess of contradictions, blurring the terrifying line between a tragic accident and something far more sinister. It was supposed to be an escape. The trip to the breathtaking Pacific coast of Mexico was meant for relaxation, but instead the vacation spiralled into a nightmare that no one could have foreseen. Carol was out on the water in a small chartered boat, accompanied by Peter Marshall, a handful of other friends, and the local deckhands. That is exactly where the thread began to pull and the situation started to completely fall apart. People there recall a sudden chilling shift in the vibe. Whispers of heated arguments and bizarre behaviour began to bubble up as the night wore on. In the moments before she vanished, Carol was allegedly spotted leaning dangerously over the rail, staring down into the dark abyss of the water, with some claiming she simply lost her footing. However, dark rumours persist that something sudden and perhaps violent sent her tumbling over the edge. Even her clothing became a point of contention, with conflicting reports debating whether she was dressed for a swim or wearing a nightgown, fueling endless theories about her mindset in those final moments. When questioned later, the stories given by the captain and the other passengers failed to line up, leaving gaping holes in the narrative. Some painted a picture of Carol as calm or perhaps just lost in thought, while others hinted at thick tension in the air or suggested she might have been intoxicated. Throw in the language barrier with the local crew and the disorientation of the late hour, and you have a recipe for total confusion in the witness accounts. Although emergency protocols were eventually triggered, the agonising delay in reporting her missing, combined with a chaotic search effort, likely doomed any chance of a rescue. To make matters even more baffling, when they finally recovered her remains hours later, there were absolutely no obvious signs of struggle or physical trauma. This total lack of physical clues left investigators scratching their heads, struggling to piece together what actually happened on that boat. The ocean may have washed away the physical traces, but it was the glaring inconsistencies in the eyewitness stories that truly deepened the mystery. Peter Marshall later recalled that sinking, sickening feeling when the group realised Carol was gone, describing a scene of absolute panic as they frantically tried to find her. Despite all that, the actual timeline of events remained frustratingly hazy. Crucial details regarding the specific moments right before she went into the water have never been fully clarified to the public. These massive gaps in the story left plenty of room for suspicion that the official version wasn't the whole truth, sparking endless speculation about the role of alcohol or other substances. While whispers circulated that she was under the influence, her defenders fiercely disputed this, pointing to her renowned professionalism and careful nature as proof otherwise. The truth about her physical state remains a ghost trapped somewhere between tabloid rumours and a lacklustre formal investigation. The location of the incident presented its own set of deadly challenges. The waters off the coast of Manzanillo are notoriously deep and plagued by treacherous currents, making any search operation incredibly risky and complex. Local rescue teams battled the elements and the clock, but in the end they could only recover her lifeless body, a sombre conclusion that closed the book on her life while opening a Pandora's box of questions. Every attempt to reconstruct the timeline of that tragic night has only uncovered more inconsistencies and dark shadows that simply refuse to line up. Imagine a chaotic cocktail of clashing cultures, heavy language barriers, and a crowded deck filled with a strange mix of intimate friends and total strangers. This bizarre social soup created the perfect storm for confusion, ensuring that miscommunication wasn't just likely, it was inevitable. While the official investigation claimed to offer answers, it ultimately failed to provide closure, leaving a cloud of suspicion that still lingers to this day. Let's dive into the aftermath. The probe into Carolwayne's tragic end launched the second her body was pulled from the depths, but it immediately hit a wall of uncertainty. Authorities down in Mexico didn't waste much time before stamping the file, officially ruling her death an accidental drowning. Their conclusion was simple and arguably too convenient. She had merely lost her footing and slipped off the small vessel into the pitch-black waters near Manzanillo. According to the medical examiner, the autopsy was clean, no bruises, no defensive wounds, and absolutely no trauma that would suggest a struggle or foul play. This sanitised version of events was sold to the public as the final truth, but right from the jump it felt flimsy and left gaping holes in the story. To be frank, the investigation was suspiciously brief, lacking the kind of forensic grit and determination you would expect for such a high-profile Hollywood mystery. Police conducted bare minimum interviews, and when key witnesses gave stories that didn't match up, nobody seemed interested in pressing them for the truth. Throw in the fact that half the people couldn't understand the other half, combined with the red tape between Mexican law enforcement and American diplomats, and you had a total mess. The media frenzy was instantaneous, with news outlets from both sides of the border tearing the official report to shreds. Reporters loudly criticised the detectives for their lack of transparency, accusing them of running a sloppy and secretive operation. What really set off alarm bells was the timeline. The delay in reporting Carol missing was incredibly disturbing to anyone paying attention. It seems the people partying on the boat didn't even notice she had vanished for quite some time, and the search that followed was a disorganised circus. This sparked intense speculation that critical life-saving hours were wasted time when a rescue mission might have actually found her alive. The sloppy, haphazard way everything was handled raised serious eyebrows, making people wonder if the authorities ever truly cared about solving the case. Peter Marshall, who was by Carol's side during the trip, played ball with the police, but later vented his own frustration about how limited the inquiry really was. He painted a picture of absolute chaos and a sinking feeling of dread as the night wore on, though he admitted his own memory of the timeline was hazy. His story remains one of the few detailed eyewitness accounts we have, yet even his version of events is full of grey areas and missing pieces. It is exactly this ambiguity that has fueled 4 decades of doubt among the people who actually knew and loved Carol. When her family heard the police's final verdict, they were in total shock and refused to accept such a neat and tidy conclusion. They felt the detectives had glossed over glaring inconsistencies and completely failed to look at any other suspects or scenarios. For her loved ones, the stony silence from officials regarding the weirdest parts of the case was a source of agonising pain and deep suspicion. They screamed for a deeper investigation, but their pleas hit a brick wall, reinforcing the gut feeling that a massive secret was being kept hidden. The coroner's report stuck to the script, citing fluid in the lungs as proof of drowning and insisting she wasn't under the influence of drugs or alcohol. However, the public was never allowed to see the full forensic files, leading many to believe the autopsy was a rush job designed to close the case fast. The secrecy surrounding the medical evidence just poured gasoline on the fire, frustrating everyone who was hunting for the real truth about her death. Years later, whispers on the street suggested that local cops were under heavy pressure to wrap things up immediately. The theory goes that they needed to avoid an international scandal to protect the region's booming tourism industry from bad press. While we can't prove it in 2026, the lightning speed of the case closure has kept rumours of a cover-up alive for generations. The whole thing felt less like a quest for justice and more like a bureaucratic manoeuvre to make a problem disappear. The official narrative just didn't sit right with her peers, who refused to swallow the tragic accident explanation without a fight. They pointed to the bizarre details like why she was on deck in a nightgown instead of swimwear as proof that something was wrong. Conflicting witness timelines and Carol's known meticulous nature made the idea of a clumsy slip and fall seem totally out of character. These unanswered questions have cast a long dark shadow over her legacy, ensuring that the police's version of history never fully stuck. The flimsiness of the investigation coloured public opinion for decades, making everyone sceptical of what they were told. It drove friends, family and fans to become amateur detectives, launching unofficial inquiries behind the backs of the cops and coroners. It serves as a chilling reminder that a mystery can easily outlive the facts, turning a tragedy into a permanent legend. The gap between the official police story and what the public actually believes is as wide and deep as the ocean itself. Even though no smoking gun has ever surfaced to officially debunk the ruling, the damage was done. That lack of trust created a fertile playground for conspiracy theories, tinting how the world views every detail of this story. So let's talk about the rumours. Over the years, countless theories have popped up to try and explain the baffling circumstances of that night. Some argue it was just a booze-fueled nightmare, a simple case of disorientation leading to a fatal mistake in the dark. But others suspect something much darker, proposing that foul play or even a calculated murder was swept under the rug. Without any solid answers to lean on, we are left with a chaotic mess of contradictory stories, each backed by its own army of believers and skeptics fighting for dominance. One of the most talked about theories centres on the tragic idea that Carol had simply had too much to drink that night. And in a confused, drunken haze, she slipped up, tumbled over the edge, and was swallowed by the dark ocean. Whispers from that night suggest the alcohol was flowing freely with some onlookers, hinting that her judgment was definitely compromised as the evening went on. While this theory fits the heartbreaking mould of other Hollywood tragedies, it totally clashes with descriptions of Carol as a sharp, cautious woman who wouldn't dare take reckless risks, especially alone in pitch-black, unfamiliar waters. On the flip side, the rumour mill has been spinning out of control for years with a much darker narrative, suggesting that maybe someone else on that yacht had a sinister motive to want her out of the picture. We are talking about classic motives like green-eyed jealousy, messy money disputes, or a personal grudge deep enough to drive someone to shove her overboard or hurt her in ways we can't imagine. These dark theories are fueled by the shady behaviour of witnesses and gaping holes in the police reports, even though no smoking gun has ever surfaced to lock anyone up. Then you have the angle that keeps conspiracy theorists up at night, the idea of a massive cover-up. A calculated plot designed to bury the real story of how Carol met her end under a mountain of lies and red tape. Believers argue that heavy hitters from the entertainment world or corrupt local officials pulled some strings to ensure the investigation didn't look too closely at the truth. It is tough to prove these claims since they mostly rely on whispers and hearsay, but the theories stick around because the official story has more holes than Swiss cheese, and her inner circle won't stop asking questions. Of course, there are also theories that chalk it up to a freak accident, but one made infinitely worse by Mother Nature having a bad day. We are talking about treacherous currents, unforgiving dark waters, and the kind of unpredictable weather changes that Manzanillo is notorious for throwing at unsuspecting tourists. Survival experts will tell you that even one wrong step in conditions like that can turn a fun evening into a fatal disaster in the blink of an eye. This version paints the whole ordeal as a heartbreaking stroke of bad luck amplified by the ocean's cruel and hazardous nature. The public just could not look away, feeding on every scrap of gossip splashed across tabloids, dissected on late-night TV and whispered in celebrity columns. The press loved to hype up the contradictions to sell papers, creating a media circus that often buried the actual facts under layers of manufactured drama. Blurring the line between reality and hype just confused everyone, more transforming Carol's death into one of those dark, cautionary Hollywood legends that never seems to die. Every now and then, her family and friends would step into the spotlight to throw their 2 cents into the ring regarding these wild theories. Sometimes they would shut down the more sensational claims, but other times they would admit they were looking at darker alternate possibilities themselves. Their divided views just show how messy and emotionally complex this loss is, as they try to make sense of a tragedy that makes absolutely no sense. Every fresh whisper brought a glimmer of hope that maybe finally we would get some clarity, only to be let down when the answers never came. One story that just will not go away is the persistent rumour that a screaming match or some kind of dispute broke out right before Carol vanished into thin air. Even though people hinted the vibe on the boat was tense, nobody ever went on record to confirm they saw fists flying or heard a specific altercation. But the suggestion of a conflict hangs over the case like a dark cloud because it offers a clear motive and adds a dramatic flair to a situation that is otherwise just baffling. All these layers of gossip and guesswork only make it harder to dig up the truth, pushing us to look for that one big break that could finally crack the case wide open. Fresh clues and shocking bombshells. Decades after we lost Carolwayne, new nuggets of information and witness testimonies have surfaced, totally rocking the foundation of the original "it was just an accident" narrative. Retired detectives and industry insiders have started dropping hints about details that were either missed or conveniently swept under the rug back in the day. These new tidbits suggest that the narrative surrounding Carol's final moments on Earth was a whole lot darker and more twisted than anyone dared to admit to the public at the time. With new voices finally stepping up to the microphone, the mystery has caught fire again, sparking obsession and scrutiny among fans and experts alike. One major bombshell dropped when former crew members who were actually working the deck that fateful night decided to break their silence. They kept their mouths shut at first, but later revealed that the vibe on board was way more hostile than the official reports claimed, describing heated shouting matches and a weird, uneasy energy. Their accounts talked about booze flowing in quantities that were never mentioned in the police files, ramping up the suspicion about how chaotic the atmosphere really was right before she disappeared. This paints a picture of a powder keg waiting to explode, which is a far cry from the peaceful, relaxing vacation story they tried to sell us initially. On top of that, some eyewitnesses have started second-guessing the reliability of the stories that were fed to the authorities way back when. Sure, memory gets fuzzy after trauma and the passing of time, but some folks are hinting that people deliberately held back the truth to save their own skins or dodge legal nightmares. This brings up a truly chilling possibility that changes everything. That critical details about how Carol ended up in the water were not just accidentally missed, they were actively hidden from us. Modern forensic experts have taken another look and found glaring mismatches between the old autopsy reports and the physical reality of Carol's body condition. Even though the cause was officially listed as drowning, there were suspicious marks like unexplained bruising that point towards something far more sinister. The physical evidence painted a disturbing picture, pointing less toward a clumsy slip and more toward a violent struggle or physical altercation right before she hit the water. Shockingly, these crucial forensic details were never properly dissected in the public eye or during the official hearings, leaving a massive gap in the narrative. To make matters worse, family members have come forward claiming that in the years since Carol passed, they have been tormented by anonymous tips and cryptic letters. These chilling messages hinted that members of Carol's inner circle were sitting on dark secrets they refused to share with the police. Such mysterious correspondence only fueled the burning suspicion that witnesses were being silenced and a massive cover-up was in play. Although these clues were maddeningly vague, they suggested a fortress of secrecy around that night, with certain players desperate to keep painful truths buried forever. Private investigators hired by Carol's estate reportedly dug up serious irregularities in her financial documents that raised immediate red flags. They also uncovered personal letters from the late star that hinted at explosive disagreements and rising tensions in her private life. These conflicts might have pushed her into a spiralling personal crisis that was rapidly spinning out of control, among other darker possibilities. The emergence of this information suggested that external threats or even dangerous individuals might have played a role in her fate. This moves the conversation way beyond a simple tragic accident, adding a sinister new layer to the enduring mystery of her death. The situation gets even murkier when you look at the bizarre behaviour of local authorities in the immediate aftermath of the tragedy. We are talking about potential evidence being withheld and the case being closed with suspicious speed, conveniently skipping any real criminal scrutiny. It established a disturbing pattern that strongly implied institutional interests were meddling to make the problem go away quietly. Proving that the investigation was botched to protect the local tourism industry or diplomatic ties is a tall order. However, the theory that officials wanted to avoid a scandal is a very real possibility that explains the lack of a thorough inquiry. It is a scenario that simply cannot be brushed aside when you look at the facts. Another critical piece of this puzzle comes from recent interviews with the people who actually knew Carol best. These conversations have finally shed light on her fragile mental state in the tumultuous months leading up to her untimely end. One close friend described a woman who was battling deep-seated insecurities and paralysing fears behind the scenes. Yet she was also a fighter who refused to let go of her hopes and big dreams for a comeback. This complex emotional depth softens the image of the bubbly blonde star, adding a heartbreakingly human element to this tragic saga. When you stack all these new details together, the story of Carol Wayne's death transforms from a simple drowning into something far more sinister. It becomes a labyrinth of secrets, lies, and burning questions that are still begging for answers decades later. The shifting evidence forces us to conclude that the events on that boat were anything but a clear-cut accident. The shadows looming over Carol's final moments naturally force us to confront the most controversial and unsettling part of the story. We have to look at the motives and the swirling suspicions surrounding the people who were standing right next to her. For years, truth seekers have obsessed over the complex web of relationships that surrounded Carolwayne. Peter Marshall, who was present on the boat that fateful night, naturally became a lightning rod for scrutiny, even though he was never formally charged with any crime. Still, insiders point to the complicated mix of their professional partnership and personal history, wondering if hidden tensions helped spark the tragedy. Digging into these dynamics reveals a tangled mess of connections that makes it nearly impossible to see the straight truth. But it wasn't just Peter Marshall. Other figures in Carol's orbit also sparked intense curiosity and whispered suspicion. Carol was reportedly juggling a minefield of friendships and romances that often ignited fierce jealousy and bitter rivalries. The high-stakes pressure cooker of Hollywood, mixed with her personal struggles, created a breeding ground for conflict that is easy to miss in the sad headlines. Whispers of nasty disputes, whether over career moves or private feuds, have fueled rampant speculation about who might have wanted to harm her. Then there is the money angle, with some sleuths pointing to financial desperation as a key factor in her demise. Despite her fame, rumours persisted of crushing financial strain and unpaid debts that could have created dangerous friction with her associates. These murky financial details often cast a long shadow over mysterious celebrity deaths, complicating the narrative. It adds a cold, practical motive to what otherwise looks like purely emotional turmoil. Whether cash flow problems played a direct role in her final moments is unproven, but it remains a hot topic of debate. Even more disturbing are the dark rumours suggesting that certain people in her inner circle actually stood to gain from her disappearing. These grim theories usually circulate in tabloid gossip, focusing on inheritance grabs, career shifts, or the settling of old scores. While these theories lack hard proof, their stubborn persistence shows just how desperate people are to find a logical reason for such a senseless loss. Adding fuel to the fire is the strange behaviour of certain individuals in the days immediately following the incident. Reports surfaced that some of her companions were dodgy when questioned, offering stories that simply did not add up. The way everyone clammed up and refused to cooperate with the detectives created a thick cloud of suspicion, practically begging for conspiracy theories to take root. We still don't know if they were paralysed by fear in total shock or if they were deliberately trying to hide the dirty laundry. You also have to consider the intense psychological pressure cooker that builds up when a social group is trapped together on a boat in the middle of nowhere. Little disagreements can blow up into dangerous fights in a heartbeat, often acting as a smokescreen for deep-seated grudges and secrets they wanted to keep buried. Carol was already in a fragile state, and her vulnerability might have rubbed someone the wrong way, sparking a flash of anger or a reckless move that couldn't be taken back. We can't know exactly what emotions were boiling over in that moment, but it highlights just how volatile and unpredictable people can get when a tragedy is unfolding. As we pull at these threads of doubt and suspicion woven through the official narrative, we start to see a picture forming, one that shatters the easy accident theory and exposes a much uglier reality lurking underneath the waves. So what actually went down that fateful night? After decades of dead ends, conflicting stories and botched police work, the smartest money says Carolwayne's death was a tragedy far more complex than a simple slip and fall. Fresh looks at the case file suggest her final moments were a perfect storm of terrible decisions. Toxic relationships reaching a breaking point and absolute chaos reigning on that boat. We might never have a smoking gun, but the wall of silence put up by the key players tells us the real story is much grimmer and more twisted than what the papers reported. The forensic details tell a disturbing tale, too specifically the weird gaps in the autopsy report and those bruises that nobody could explain away. It all points to the terrifying possibility that Carol was fighting for her life or caught in a violent struggle moments before she hit the water. The stories from the people on board don't match up, which hints that tempers were flaring and emotions were running dangerously high that evening. When you add it all up, it looks less like a tragic accident and more like the deadly result of a fight or a panic-induced scramble that went horribly wrong. It seems pretty clear that heavy booze and emotional stress were the main characters in this tragedy. Carol might have been a total pro on the set, but the vibe on that boat was spiralling out of control, far from the calm vacation it was supposed to be. Excessive drinking, screaming matches, and likely arguments clouded everyone's judgment, ratcheting up the tension until the situation became lethal. In that chaotic mess, it only takes one wrong step or one angry shove to send someone over the edge when they are confused and defenseless. Even the fragmented memories shared by Peter Marshall regarding the event just add to the feeling that something was deeply wrong and chaotic. His presence and role in the narrative, while not legally criminal, really highlight the messy and complicated interpersonal dynamics that were at play. We know the relationships involved were explosive, and a sudden argument or a drunken misunderstanding could have easily been the spark that set everything off. While prosecutors could never nail down a concrete motive, you simply can't ignore the heavy emotional baggage that was weighing everyone down. The fact that certain witnesses practically dragged their feet when the cops came knocking really adds weight to the theory that there was a cover-up, or at the very least an intentional pact of silence. Maybe they were scared, maybe they were loyal, or maybe they just wanted to save their own skins. But their silence effectively buried the truth of Carol's last hours. And let's not forget how fast the Mexican authorities closed the file, which screams that someone high up wanted this whole thing to go away without any real digging. On top of that, Carol was drowning in financial trouble and personal drama, which likely turned the pressure dial up to 11 before she even stepped on board. The lawsuits, the mounting debts, and the emotional toll paint a picture of a woman silently battling impossible odds while the world just saw a smiling blonde. When you mix that internal stress with the hostile vibe on the boat, you start to understand the human side of this disaster. It was a ticking time bomb. This wasn't just some random bad luck. It was the catastrophic finale to an incredibly brutal chapter in Carol's life. The most likely scenario is that a tragic fall was triggered by a deadly cocktail of too much alcohol, emotional turmoil, and terrible judgment calls. Whether she slipped on her own or things got physical during a fight, the result is the same heartbreaking reality. A beloved star vanished into the ocean under the shadiest circumstances imaginable. Her death wasn't a simple misfortune. It was a complicated web of human flaws, hidden secrets, and bad timing all colliding at once. The truth here doesn't give us a happy ending or warm comfort, but it gives us a clearer look at the ugly reality hiding behind the tabloids and the hush-hush agreements. The tragedy of Carol Wayne teaches us that in calamities like this, the real answer is usually found in the messy, uncomfortable shadows, not in the neat and tidy explanations the authorities try to feed us. The lingering questions and the half-truths we have been left with remind us just how fragile life is and how toxic human relationships can become. Ultimately, the fate of Carol Wayne serves as a grim warning to all of us about who you trust, what you perceive, and the invisible wars that celebrities fight behind closed doors. It forces us to look past the glitz and glamour to face the sadness and doubt that always haunt these unsolved mysteries. Carol Wayne's story is a haunting journey from Hollywood fame to a nightmare tragedy that even years later feels clearer yet darker than ever. It stands as a chilling reminder that the truth is often buried deep under layers of silence and suspicion. If you enjoyed getting the inside scoop on this messy situation, please go ahead and hit that like button right now. And do not forget to subscribe so you are always the first to know about the wildest celebrity secrets and scandals unfolding this year.